Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Frank Schaeffer. He's the author of Letter to Lucy, a manifesto of creative redemption for the age of Trump, fascism, and lies. His website, Frank Schaeffer, SCHAEFFER.com. And you can tweet him at Frank_Schaeffer, sort of like Thom_Hartmann, of a former evangelical, well, an evangelist. Well, Frank, welcome back to the program. I should let you introduce yourself. And you've been
Thank you.
And you've been talking at some length about how evangelical Christians think that it's just a wonderful thing that the Jerusalem embassy, that the embassy in Israel has been moved into occupied Jerusalem, and because it's going to bring Jesus back to earth. You know, what's going on with all this?
Well, you know, back when Ralph Reed, Franklin Graham, Jerry Falwell Jr., Dr. Dobson, who founded Focus on the Family, basically cut a deal with Trump. The deal was this, that is unspoken but very direct. We'll put up with all your philandering, your 3 marriages, your multiple affairs, paying off porn stars, your lies, your bogus university, your 6 bankruptcies, your claims about wealth that you don't have, your failing to file tax returns with the public and let them know what you've got. We'll put up with all that as long as you do a couple of things for us. 1, we want anti-abortion judges at the federal level across the board. 2, we believe in the prophecies of Scripture being fulfilled only if Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. The Jews control most of what was Judea and Samaria, in other words, maintain the occupied territories. And as long as you will, as it were, let your foreign policy when it comes to the Middle East be directed by Christian Zionism, the Zionism represented by people like Reverend Hagee in Houston and Reverend Jeffress, who's now an advisor to the president, we will go along with whatever else you do. We don't care about the economy because we think the world is ending. We don't care how many wars you get into because that all looks like biblical prophecy to us of the end times. We don't believe in global warming in any way. Bring it on. The world is ending. We don't care about earthly things. You just do our agenda, and we'll back you. And they've continued to do that. They did it with Roy Moore, you know, an alleged pedophile. No problem as long as you maintain our agenda. Now, back in the day when I was a leader in the religious right in the 70s and 80s, we would not have believed where all this went. But we, my dad and I, Francis Schaeffer, who was a well-known theologian and evangelist, Dr. Everett Koop, who I made a film series with, who then became Ronald Reagan's Surgeon General, and he and I and my dad essentially started the evangelical wing of the anti-abortion movement. Our ideas then were that we had to stop abortion. We regarded it as murder. The gay rights scene was just beginning to emerge, and we were standing against that. But the culture war since has spun out to the point where the evangelical vote, the white evangelical voter, not only put Trump in power, they are maintaining him in power. They are the last bastion of his support. And so when they all turned up in Jerusalem recently to have a prayer meeting while the Israeli military snipers shot down 60 Palestinians in cold blood from positions on a fortified wall in which not one Israeli was killed or injured on the military side, 60 to nothing, an absolute massacre. These evangelicals, Hagee and Jeffress and others, gathered in a prayer meeting with the Prime Minister of Israel, who has pursued a very nefarious, underhanded policy for years now, coddling the lunatic fringe, the moron fringe of the white evangelical American voter, the extremist fringe, the people who think Jesus is coming back any moment, or at least raise a lot of money pretending they do, like John Hagee, who's a total flake and con artist, who I know personally. And so you see the whole thing coming together. You've got the Prime Minister of Israel having American foreign policy deformed and formed by the evangelical vote that has put a completely unworthy man in the presidency. And you have these guys showing up for the party with the backdrop of gunfire. So it's apocalyptic, but not the way they mean. It is exactly the opposite of what you just talked about in your last segment, with Madison and others trying to keep religion and public life separate. U.S. foreign policy, and I think people should get this through their head, when it comes to the Middle East, is now being dictated by the moron lunatic fringe of the white evangelical movement. And that's where we are today with Donald Trump. That's the deal he made for them to put him in power and keep their support going.
We're talking with Frank Schaeffer, frankschaeffer.com, his book, Letter to Lucy. Frank, you were, back in the 70s, I read Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey and got all flipped out for about a year about this, and I was attending an evangelical church myself, and the Church of God in Lansing, Michigan. And I kind of came out of that, or came through that, I guess. You did too. You have had your own epiphany, as it were, about how corrupt this so-called religious right is. How do we reach out to the people who are being exploited by groups like the billionaire groups, billionaire Rupert Murdoch, of course, owns Fox News. They exploit these people. You've got, obviously, Netanyahu exploiting these people. Hagee, you mentioned, and I forget the other guy's name who was there in Jerusalem. That's right, Jeffers. How do we speak to their followers, people who like you and I at one point actually believe this stuff? How do we help them wake up?
Well, on a theological level, you mentioned Hal Lindsey's Late Great Planet Earth. I knew Hal very well. He used to come to my dad's ministry of Libre Fellowship back in the late 60s and 70s when he was all fresh and bushy-tailed and was going to write this great book, and then it came out. Then a few years later, he had to revise it because nothing he said was going to happen. A few years later, he revised it again. I mean, really, Saturday Night Live couldn't do a better job mocking these prophetic claims than revised books, updating the timetable for the return of Jesus. And then, of course, the whole series came out, Late Great Planet Earth, and that in a fiction form, sort of updated it again, 60 million copies sold.
That's the Left Behind books, you mean?
Yeah, the Left Behind.
Yeah.
What did I just say?
Yeah.
Left Behind. And what happened was basically a cult formed within evangelicalism of the rapture. And it was used by evangelists for years to scare kids in the aisle. You better come to Jesus, confess your sins, because Jesus could come back any day. Israel's a nation again. We see signs. Any day you're going to look up now, the moon will turn to blood and Jesus will be on the way, and you better get right with the Lord. That's how it was used. It was also used as fundraising. It's an enormous scam. A guy like Hagee and these others have built literal empires on this end-time nonsense. And then, of course, Israel has exploited it. Now, the Israeli government, not only are they Jews who are not Christians, but most of them are secularists, most of them are atheists. They are in Israel itself, they do business with Orthodox Jews, but the government is run by a secular group of technocrats, just like governments all over the world are. They look at these people as idiots, useful idiots, that they stroke and speak their language to and bring on tours to Israel. And now that they've got Trump doing their bidding, they think that, this will all work out and this is their backbone of support. And, of course, the great shame is on two fronts. First, if you were appealing, to answer your question, to the evangelical follower in this cult, who literally has cracked. I mean, these people's brains have been deformed by this. They've been in it so long. You'd have to say, look, none of the claims of the last 20, 30, 40 years of prophecy have come true. You have been lied to. All those books you bought, all those hundreds of dollars you spent on seminars, none of it happened. Second point would be you are being exploited by flakes like Hagee who are making money off you, by manipulative, cynical politicians, both in the United States and the Republican Party, ultimately Donald Trump and everybody in the Republican Party these days, and then in addition to that, doubly so by an atheistic group of Jewish technocrats in Israel who not only think your theology is insane, but behind your back to scoff at you, but use you as useful idiots. And I would say this to my friends in Israel, and that is something else. You've made a bad bargain. We're going to toss these idiots out on their ear in 2018 and then in 2020. You have politicized support from Israel to the point where it is now a Republican issue in exactly the same way that abortion has become a Republican issue, a litmus test. And what you've done is you basically told the Democrats and right-thinking Republican people who are not part of this cult, we don't need you. we want to cater to the lunatic fringe of the fundamentalist cults within the United States. That's who our support is. Well, you're welcome to them. Look at the demographics. This is an aging group of white voters who are going to go away. They are being replaced by a group of young people, many of whom describe themselves as nuns, N-O-N-E, not nuns in habits. In other words, they have no religion. And when that clock turns, what you're going to be left with is a politicized idea about Israel, that this is just the field of crazy white evangelical Trump supporters who have winked and nodded at his disastrous presidency. 10, 15 years from now, when you chart the decline of support for Israel in the United States, they're going to remember Benjamin Netanyahu as a curse word for a fool who talked his government into supporting what amounts to a fringe party of old people that are going to be going away. And so it's a bad deal for Israel. It's a horrible deal for America. It makes fools of us globally. It means all our Middle Eastern entanglements, in which there is multiple instances of American bloodshed, including 9/11, by the way. All of this is inexplicable without understanding this sort of connection to Israel and the rest of it. Now with Trump, we've gone to a new level where he's actually sitting down with Jeffress and these guys in the Oval Office and allowing them to dictate policy. And I don't think most Americans understand that. This is evangelical fundamentalist end times policy being written for a president who is clueless about world affairs. And so it's a real mess. I'm 67, and I've certainly seen nothing like this in my lifetime from either party.
Yeah, we are the same age, in fact. Fascinating stuff. We're talking with Frank Schaeffer. His book is Letter to Lucy, a manifesto for creative redemption for the age of Trump, fascism, and lies. His website, Frank Schaeffer, SCHAEFFER.com. You can tweet him at Frank_Schaeffer. Frank, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Tom.
You put it so well, so clearly, so tightly, so concisely. I really appreciate it. I'm really impressed. Frank Schaeffer.
Thank you.
A great man. Thank you. I think you're doing God's work right now. Thank you, Frank.
Thanks.
We will be back with more of the news of the day.